So first and foremost, if people don't know, tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and how you came to role at Chalk and Blade. What is Chalk and Blade? And yeah, just a little bit about your background for anybody that may not be aware.
Sure. So I'm head of production at Chalk and Blade. We're a boutique podcast production company. We only produce podcasts, which actually is a little bit unusual for production companies in the UK, because a lot of production companies uh, who make podcasts originally made radio and still make radio, whereas we never made radio. And we make stuff for platforms like Audible, BBC, as well as brands. So we make podcasts for Net-a-Porter. Used to say Net-a-Porter, but now I've been told to say Net-a-Porter. And some brands, random brands. And my background, I'm Canadian, so I've been in London for 6 years. And when I was looking to do my second degree after I did my undergrad in English literature, I really wanted to make podcasts, but I couldn't find a school that taught podcasting. So this was back in 2010 that I was doing my second degree. So I was one of those early listeners to podcasts. And so I kind of landed on just doing broadcast journalism, radio journalism. And then I was hoping that I could then, work for a podcast like This American Life. A lot of the podcasts were American, so I was thinking maybe I'd move to the States afterwards. But I ended up working at the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, which is just like the BBC. It's called the CBC. And then I moved to London because my family is British, so I have a British passport in 2014, which is when the podcast Serial exploded. And I'd be curious to know if your audience even knows what Serial is, because it was so huge, but now it's kind of like out of date already if you're young.
Yeah, I feel like that was probably my first experience discovering podcasts. Was I had been chatting to somebody and they said, have you listened to Serial? And they tried to explain it to me. And then once I, did a bit of research behind it, I found out it was huge. And as you said, like when you were obviously looking for these opportunities to get into podcasts and that, digital audio at the time, I mean, there really wasn't much out there. It was almost like the early days of, say, other digital content like YouTube and stuff like that. Like Serial, I relate back to even their graphics that they have seems so kind of like dated at this stage, but it was such, a precursor for everything that had to come along and informed so much of what we know as normal podcasts today. So
it was the first mainstream hit, and it really proved that there's an audience and that this isn't just some random medium, that podcasting is something that people listen to. This is how they consume content. But it really felt for a while that we were having to introduce podcasts to a lot of the companies that we were meeting with. And we weren't necessarily, for a long time, we weren't necessarily selling even our idea. We had to sell podcasting, which was actually quite frustrating because, especially in the UK, it just felt, everyone said that the UK was about three to 5 years behind. And it was just became a bit exhausting. It felt like you were trying to convince, like someone about social media, and it's like so clear that it's a thing, and they were like, but is it just everyone showing their breakfast? Like, you're like, no, it's how everyone communicates. So it was finally about 2 years ago we got there.
But I think, as you said, because it isn't new anymore, and it's taken over. I was looking at some statistic, and it was in America. I think this was back in about 2016 or something. It
Mm,
was saying, I think like 70% of like actual like the population had confirmed that they are regular listeners to podcasts,
yeah.
which if you think about percentage of population to a relatively new, source of media, and not even broadcasting, it's, do you know what I mean? It's digital, it's on demand. That's such something to blow up as quickly and to have such a
Yeah.
variety, because podcasts, it isn't even like anything else where it's TV or radio. It's so its own market, and from there it's become so niche. You can almost find anything that you're interested in, and from there find anything that you're interested in, but to a specific standard or specific time. Like there's
Hmm.
1 minute podcasts, there's podcasts that go on for hours. Some are chats, some are, as you said, like Serial, where it explores, murder mysteries and things like this. It's such an eclectic thing for to blow up so quickly.
Yeah.
And in recent years, like, I think this has been a big thing that's maybe pulled it into people's kind of periphery, is now this kind of link between new digital kind of podcasting and how it relates within to, say, big hit TV shows. They use that
Mm.
as kind of like a tie-in together, because people aren't satisfied with binging anymore. They want more, and they want to have the discussions around it. And podcasting is such a crucial way to continue that kind of marketing and even
Hmm.
discussions about things. But
Hmm.
that will kind of lead me on to my next question, essentially. So again, kind of from your experience, how does world of podcasting and audio exclusive content kind of differ from, say, other visual traditional forms of medium broadcasting? As I said, about kind of audiences have kind of changed the
Hmm.
way they consume things. Do you think audiences' interests, like how they take on audio, where it's just in the background, do you think that's more of an appealing aspect rather than having to sit down and actively engage with something? You can almost go about your day and do everything that you need. I know
Hmm.
a lot of like peak times for listening is, when people are driving to work, when they're going home,
Hmm.
or when they just have those odd hours in the day, which traditional broadcasters are struggling to get these audiences. That's because they're all have to do things, but podcasting interloops that, where you can do it and it's on demand and it's when you want to. Have you found that from your experience, or is there anything?
Yeah. So we usually compare it to radio. Um, and it's slowly changing where we are comparing podcasting now more to other digital platforms, but most of um, mostly we're comparing it to radio. And what we've found, not me personally, the industry has found, is that the way that people listen really informs what the content is. So for radio, you put it on in the background, and people kind of come in and out. You have the radio on in the kitchen, and you're like walking in and out. So the information has to be something that almost resets itself every minute. So you don't need to know the full story. You can just kind of join the conversation with
Mm,
radio. Maybe not so much for drama, but uh, I don't know too much about that. So for podcasting, it's something that you're opting into. So um, it that means there can be kind of more complex storytelling, because people are pressing, play, and then they're listening through to the whole thing on their, commute or walk or while they're making dinner. And then it also means that because people are opting in, the content is hyper focused to that demographic. So it's narrow casting, as they say. So, and it's also more authentic because people are speaking directly to you. So you can't really fake that as much as you can for other traditional forms of broadcasting. And we're finding all sorts of, there's other trends, like in news, it's a lot more particular. It's not balanced. So if you look at something like the Today program, where they kind of try to represent different opinions, if you have opinion, you opt into your particular podcast. So that, and there's pluses and minuses for that, echo chamber, etc. But it also means, so there's all those things that we've noticed, but the other thing is it's also evolving so fast. So people, as new phones come out, people's listening habits are constantly changing, and different age brackets will listen differently. So, some people don't wear headphones. They just, and they'll listen in public without headphones. There's all sorts of things that we don't, we found, we did some research, and teenagers listen while they're doing homework. So they're listening while they're doing other things. That's completely new to us. That was a new revelation. So as those new listening trends come in, then we adapt. You should be adapting your content to reflect those kind of listening habits. So, and you should really be thinking, when someone's making dinner, what do they want to listen to? And how does that, is it stories? Is it something a little bit, is it more kind of conversation? So we can really tailor the content to every particular, a teenage girl listening while she's doing homework, or a mother making dinner while her kids are screaming around her. You really should be taking into account exactly how people are listening.
Yeah, I think that's what you've kind of nailed it on the head there. It's such a consumer-driven platform, where I know from different kind of experiences in TV development, a lot of times you're pitching shows and you're saying it has to fit in for a certain time slot, or it has to fit in of what they know people will kind of be doing within that range. But because podcasting is such an on-demand thing, it's not like radio where you're tuning in, even just for audio sake, you're tuning in for a specific show. You're tuning in for when suits you, and then that informs obviously what content is being created, because you're trying to again hit those kind of markets, hit those demographics. But it's such, I think there's nothing that really, it's so specific. As you said, you're so many different niches and things that you have to cater for. You have to take into account that these people aren't maybe just coming from home. People might be listening. I know in past jobs, I've listened to them while I work, because I like the conversational style in it, especially in a quiet office. It's whether that, people would say, for daytime TV, sometimes there's shows that are thrown on that are fillers or repeats, just because they know that people aren't really engaging, and then they keep the hard hitters to the evening when people are free. But it's completely not that way anymore. I think that's one of the reasons that I find it so interesting. And again, you can always go back. I know radio does have a lot of their stuff is recorded and it's accessible now. And same with different players like Netflix. People are getting more used to, I'll tune in when I have time or when suits me. It's I think, but podcasting especially has been one of the big precursors to being, it is on demand. It is when you need it. It's when it suits you. And it's informed so much of the broader media, even though, as you said, trying to sell that to people, they would have gone, no, what are you talking about? But if you look at other platforms, say TikTok and stuff like this, before lockdown, I think I would have said, that's so stupid. It's not going to last. It's there's nothing to it. Now people have become so famous off it, and companies are still trying to get their heads wrapped around how they can, work with that. But when you see the figures, and when you see how many people are engaging with it and how many people are contributing to it, making their own stuff, similar with podcasts, you have to realize that this is a new consumer market. But from going on with that, from obviously people that are listening and engaging with these podcasts, for you as somebody that works in the industry, making these things come to life, what does a regular day, I think, I don't even know if there is a regular day, but what does a regular day in a world of podcast production look like? Is there even one, or is it kind of one day from the next? Is because it's all over the place, and I imagine during lockdown it's even more precarious how you're recording things, because it's not coming into office or a studio. It's like this, we're recording online. So
yeah, I'll sort of answer that pre-lockdown. So I think, as I mentioned before, there's a big part of our day which is kind of sales, like hustling, because it's such a new medium. It's, thinking of new leads, who might need a podcast, who might be in, what kind of companies might have the budgets for a podcast. So there's quite a kind of business component to our work, and just kind of keeping up to date on, strategies of places like Spotify. The biggest suppliers keep changing, and they keep changing what they're looking for. So there's a lot of kind of pitching and finding the right talent, and it feels a lot of times it feels like we're kind of a creative ad agency where there's a lot of hustle, that, a lot of making decks and presenting to clients. And, those clients can even just be the BBC or Tate, or, it's not like clients can be anyone who's buying a podcast. Whereas if you did work in radio, you don't have to sell, it's probably a lot more, you're working on a show, you're doing the same thing every day. You're not having to sell the idea of radio to someone. So it's definitely quite different every day. And then because we're a small company, we are hierarchical, but we are also all of us are doing everything all the time, because we can't really, the other day my assistant producer was really busy, so I became her assistant producer. Like we can't really afford to not help each other out, because that's not our jobs.
yeah, that's actually what I was going to kind of ask next, I suppose, which I find really interesting. Like, what are the roles within specific to the industry that people may not know about? Because I would know, if you think in terms of film or TV, you kind of, or even radio, there's a producer, there's, your talent. There may be, in other terms, directors, a lot of, when it comes into visual aids, then there'll be, cameramen, like all these different lighting and different things. But for such a specific niche of podcasts, what are the specific roles that I and others may not know about that are available out there? As you said, producer, but also you're half sales, half marketing, like.
Yeah, that's why my title is head of production. It could also, I've seen a similar title be, there's lead producer, creative producer, creative lead, and these are titles that are kind of borrowing from marketing a little bit. So originally, like 5 years ago, they were just the same roles as radio. So there was researcher, producer, executive producer, but that didn't really, especially the role researcher, because how much research are you going to be doing on like an entertainment podcast, or it doesn't really make sense. So I think right now most of the roles are just producer, assistant producer, and I think I would definitely give the advice to like younger people to really make sure if you're in a job interview or having getting hired for like a contract, really be specific. Ask for specifics about what that role is, because people will just say producer, but it means very different things in different roles. So sometimes it's a lot, a kind of logistics producer, setting up details, booking guests, booking studios. And sometimes it's writing scripts. Sometimes it's more recording, editing, that kind of thing. So really just make sure you know exactly what they want of you. And then the other big role is an audio engineer, sound designer. And this is something where, there was a trend a couple of years ago for the producer to do everything, but now podcasting isn't actually as DIY as people think it is. So there is a real element of technicality that goes into it, and that recording has to be perfect. The equipment you use has to be really high quality. People need to know how to use that equipment. People, the mastering, the mixing, then the sound design. So that's a really important role, and that's a role that there are more jobs there, because there's a real demand for that, and there's less supply.
I suppose it's such a specialized skill, and as you said, like, people probably don't even realize, they probably consider a podcast somebody just chatting about something, or they might have a bit of a script going up. But I think it's such a credit to, if you are doing such a good podcast, and as Chalk and Blade have been nominated for best production company of the year, things like that. That's such a credit to the industry as well, where you want it to be as seamless as possible, where you're almost trying to be unobtrusive as to parts of editing and all the producing that goes on in the background, whether with a lot of visuals, say with TV and stuff like that. I know they can get around it by doing little forms of editing, or if there's, say, some B-roll will roll over something that maybe just didn't work out. But when it's conversation, even trying to edit down a conversation, that's a really difficult thing, to keep it still succinct and palatable. So, because you're so much more aware, like, you're unconsciously, I think, aware of what you're listening to, because something could sound weird, or something just sounds a little out of place, and you may just be going about your day. But if it's noticeable, you're very noticed to it, because that's all you're tuning into. You're maybe thinking about other things, but you've nowhere to hide in it. So yeah, I think that's such an interesting one, where producers would have taken on, almost like a catch-all kind of role, where it was like, you're creating the things, you're probably booking talent, you work with agencies or anything else, like with, commissions, and then trying to add that around as well. But I think as it builds, that's probably a good thing as well, that there are becoming more specific roles. So it kind of takes a bit of weight off, maybe going entirely into this. And as you said, there's became more of a demand then for those specialized, specific talents, which is great to know, because I mean, as you said, like, even when you were starting out looking for, your second degree, you couldn't find that, and either could I. I mean, my one, I thought, was the broadest. One of the things that I did is media and production, but never would you touched on podcasting, really.
Interesting.
So it's a really interesting kind of field, I think, and for even discovering. But I think that's one of the things that I love about it. It's such a creative role, but you have so much leeway in around it. But I suppose from that, then, as I was talking about podcasts that are really seamless and unobtrusive and are great, listen to, what, from your experience, makes a great podcast? Is it relevance and its response to an event, or even a hit TV show? Or is it purely content and production that makes a show, say, evergreen, that can be listened back to, like Serial. Because a big reason that we wanted to get in contact with yourselves is obviously from series that you have put together, obsessed with normal people, obsessed with I May Destroy. You know, these are huge things that are very relevant for the time and moment. But what makes them great in general, and then we can go down to specifics maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I think my formula is high production value plus audience insights. So if you take something like Obsessed With, where which is our BBC companion podcast series to shows like Normal People, I May Destroy You, Killing Eve, Line of Duty, Peaky Blinders, there is, even though it's a conversation where hosts will kind of unpack and discuss the latest episode, we have long production meetings, we prep, we really think about what the audience is talking about. So we choose a particular audience. So it helps to choose even a person. You know, we're talking to this person and choose the right person. That you choose the audience that, you know, is the biggest audience for that TV show. Although, if you take something for Line of Duty, we didn't choose the biggest audience, which may have been a kind of middle-aged person. We chose a younger audience. So how is the younger audience talking about Line of Duty? And then, so you really, focus in on your audience and then give them a kind of elevated but inviting, stimulating, playful conversation. So something that feels like they're talking to a friend, but it's their even funnier, even smarter, even kind of a friend with more insights than you have. But we do research, you know, we really check, we follow the hashtags on Twitter to see how people are responding to the show, which kind of plot points and aspects are we want to pick up on. And not only plot points, like, you know, we watch memes and controversy, and just we try to capture it all. So yeah, it's that. And then the conversation we edit down quite a bit and really keeping it on track. And you know, as a producer, I step in quite a bit. It's like you're, you know, guys, you're going off topic, or you're losing energy, or you're sounding like you hate the show, which actually is fine. We're not a advertisement for the show. The whole point is to capture, is to be a TV companion podcast, not extra advertising for the show. So sometimes they find things ridiculous and they address that.
That's, I suppose, what makes it such a more, you know, consumable thing, because it's not just another advertisement saying, oh, I just seen the best thing in the world. It's people having real conversations, but as you said, in such a graph where it's highly researched, it's highly, you know, these people are, you have to be so specific, and so, you know, you just have to be specific on who you're going to choose and the reason why behind that, like, and then giving them the information so that it's like having a conversation with your friends. You're, after seeing a movie, after seeing, you know, a TV show, but you really want to dig down into it and say what you thought of these situations, where it's so much of the time can go off on such a tangent. But again, it's one of those ones where you want to get that, the soul almost of the conversation and the banter and the crack, but in the most specific, highly produced way, which is, I think, incredible that there is all of that production that goes on in the background, and to get it so succinct. I mean,
although I would never, I'm not Irish, so I wouldn't say we need more crack, guys. Which I just found out that term when we produced the Normal People podcast. But it's not in my producer's vernacular.
Yeah. Probably should have clarified that a bit before.
We got a lot of clarifications when we did the Normal People podcast, so I'm up to date now.
Oh, exactly. I mean, but that's it. I mean, it's part of the conversation. You're being introduced to colloquial languages from all around. So, I mean, you're not just getting on the normal conversation, and I mean, it's becoming a global thing. So you're more aware of even people's different cultures.
And we talk about that for Normal People. We talk about the audience. So we talk about is it an audience that needs to have very particular Irishisms explained to them? No, it's not. Whereas if the host just so happened to be Irish in the Killing Eve podcast and said something about crack, I don't always know how to use crack in the sentence, then that's probably, we've got a large American audience for that. We'd have to explain, like, what do you mean by that? We talk about everything.
I have to put out a disclaimer at the start. In these words, like in this podcast, you may hear some words that you may reference to something, but this is a completely different translation.
Exactly.
But no, I think that's so interesting. That obviously that is such a thing that you guys have to take into account for as well. Like, I wouldn't even think about it as far as that, and I'm sure a lot of people, because it does come off, say, for obsessed with series where it's conversational, but they're breaking down situations. It is a genuine conversation, and things come across very chatty on it. But again, so much of that is unobtrusive, kind of producing and editing, and it's such a credit, I think, for that pulls away from one podcast being another thrown out there just for the sake of something being happening, and then a podcast that will stay and will be consistent and you can go back to and listen again and again. But I suppose from that, what a lot of the time when we do these RTS events, we're engaging with a lot, especially with Futures, young audiences and young people that are starting out in the industry and really want to make the graft in there, don't know where to start, what to do. For someone looking to get into the world of podcasting, or indeed start their own podcast, what is your best advice for them? Are there any major do's, or maybe more importantly, don'ts to keep in mind? I don't know if you have real specific advice. I suppose you touched on it. You, from your own path, getting into a production house, but is there any kind of, say, you need to get up certain experience, or you need to go in, say, if you want to be in a production house, show that this is what I engage with. I've been working in radio maybe, or I have a bit of experience making my own bits and pieces of podcasting here and there. What's the best advice?
So it's interesting. I don't, in terms of making your own podcast, I don't know a whole lot about that area, like working with creators type thing. It would almost be like, I would see that like, having your own YouTube show versus being a producer on a Netflix show. I think it all does come together. But I would just, if you do have your own show and you also want to work in podcasting for a production house, then I would really stress to the people who are hiring that you know your audience, so you have insights into your audience, and that you really know kind of content trends and what young people want to hear, and also that you aren't, a lot of people have their own show and then they don't listen to any other podcasts. So just make sure you also listen to other podcasts too. And if you don't have your own show, that's completely fine. Being a podcast fan goes a long way. So just demonstrating that you listen to all kind of stuff and you have lots of ideas that are informed by what else is out there. You already know what else is out there, is really important. And for younger people, the most exciting new market is under 21. And this is just in the last year, have people woken up to the fact that young people listen to podcasts, and everyone is really trying to desperately understand what under 21 want to listen to. And so really young people are huge commodities in huge assets in podcasting, because they truly know what's popular. So you just want to go in there and be like, okay, grandpa, this is actually what the kids are listening to. No, you don't know, I do. Here are all the TikTok accounts I follow. Here are the podcasts I listen to that you've never heard of. And you never will unless I tell you. And this is, how we listen and what we need, where the gaps are in the market, because it's really tough when you're, like me, a 35-year-old trying to understand what an 18-year-old listens to. And all the people in charge, all their kids are probably about 10. So everyone, all the people in their 40s and 50s, they're like, kids podcasts, I think I know how to do that. But actual older teenagers or Gen Z, no one seems to understand what they want to listen to.
That's such an interesting scope, even for anybody, I think, whether you're young trying to get into it. Because as you said, podcasting, you're still trying to sell it to companies saying, this is what this thing is. But even people are engaging with it. I mean, it is such a consumer-led thing. To such a great extent, as you said, people are coming in now to podcasts that's still a new thing, and they're saying, this is how it should, this is what you want for these ones. I think that's so interesting.
Yeah, when I meet with anyone under 30, I really grill them on what they listen to. And they always try to overcompensate and come in and be like, I listen to Radio 4 documentaries. And I'm like, I don't want to hear that at all. And then they're like, fine, I actually listen to video game podcasts. And I'm like, yes, tell me more. And I will write down the names, and that is very, very useful information. I really don't want to hear that they listen to radio shows.
Yeah, because I think that's one of the things as well, when you're just trying to get started out and you have a passion for an industry, you're guessing what the person wants to hear or what they think will be of value.
Yeah.
But then it's so much of it, I think even finding out from working in bits myself, people don't want to hear what you think they want you to say. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
They don't want to hear what you think you want to hear. They want to hear you genuinely, because you're the demographic, you're the audience, you're the people that will be taking it on the next gap, because it's such a quick form thing. And new podcasts are jumping up out of all sorts. So to be on trend and to be engaged with what's happening is such a vital contingency for podcasts going forward, I find. Mm-hmm. But I mean, as you said, if you went in somewhere, it's, what have you been listening to? It's, oh, I'm a big fan of the Archers. Nobody's going to say that. They're like,
it's happened.
But
people have said that to me, and I'm like, it's interesting that people say their favorite podcast is the Archers, but that also just shows that people don't are that the lines are blurring between different platforms and different mediums. So it's interesting when people say that.
I suppose, as you said, there's different rules that came into this, but I suppose because we have you specifically here as a producer, what value would you say do younger producers just breaking industry add? As you mentioned, probably from having that background, say if they're engaging with generational specific shows, is there a starting age that you could be a producer from? Because there isn't that almost you said that there is a hierarchy, but I mean, what value is there to breaking in? Like, could you become a producer within a year, or could you walk in and be a producer if you have the right background?
It's interesting because internships are, the culture around internships are changing. It's changing. So our industry, audio, there's been a real movement to try to crack down on exploitation and unpaid internships. So, but that's not always great for young people starting out, because a lot of people really rely on that. So I think there will be a kind of reimagining of what an internship is, and that kind of more formal way into the industry. BBC does all sorts of schemes that are always great, and those are great ways to break in. The youngest person we've hired was 24. I don't even know what the legal 18. I don't know what the legal age is. Could you hire a 15-year-old? I have no idea. I literally do not know.
So essentially, you're saying people could fake it in. They could say, "Yeah, no, of course you can hire me," and yeah, I mean, who knows? Yeah, I'd say chance your arm.
Yeah. But that's not where you weren't literally asking what's the youngest. You were saying, could you work within a year? Yeah, I think so. I think there are a lot of entry-level positions, because the way that teams are structured, there's probably, I would say there's more jobs full-time jobs for entry level than when you get a bit higher up. It's when you're around kind of late 20s, early 30s, those just producer roles, you're more likely to be freelance than staff. And then when you get up into mid-late 30s and beyond, then there's more positions. But younger, there's a lot of assistant producer type roles, so that's good. And like I said before, just really see the gaps on your team, and you are the young person consultant. Don't try to act old. You are the young person consultant, because every team kind of needs a test group.
I know what you're
test group.
Yeah, a test group. I think that's it.
Case study. Anyway, okay. And then I forget. Did you have another question in there?
No, it was mainly just what value can they add, but you've touched on it all. That's what they're brought in to supply their knowledge. And again, I was just being curious, is there that kind of, step and ladder? But I think you've really touched on that. We actually have a question from one of our listeners here today. This comes from John Charlesworth. I hope I pronounced that right. It kind of touches upon some of the questions that we had earlier, but I think it leads on just because we're finishing up kind of roughly in a bit. So it says, clearly podcasting is more suitable for some sectors, education, media, etc. Hence the market will segment in design, content, and availability. How do you see this evolving? I don't know if that's too broad of a question, but I think as we touched upon, podcasting, there's so many niches for it. I wouldn't even, I mean, I would never use one for education, but then I say there is quite a market for it, and I'm aware that there are some ones, but yeah, how do you see it evolving since the market will segment in design, content, and availability?
Yeah, I think it will continue to be really niche, and it's a matter of finding ways that how do you both make something, how do you find something that's niche and talks directly to an audience but is a big audience? So people often use the example of like a knitting podcast. Well, it turns out that's actually a huge audience. So again, you have to like know your audience. So someone comes to us and says, listen, like gardening, fishing, like we are looking for mainstream hits of really particular audiences, but that are huge. So that's always been and continues to be really appealing. In terms of things like education tools, I'm not involved too much with that, so I can't speak to it, but I think it will get bigger and bigger. And then and I mean, I'm really interested, if I could turn it back, if anyone's comfortable, like, where do you think, and if there are young people listening to, like, I would really love to know what people listen to and what they think is like a new exciting area to be explored. I think like video games, I think we should be doing video game podcasts, that kind of thing, like more like Twitch. That's a really interesting content platform to me. TikTok's hard, like it's so specific, but how do you take a TikTok star and give them a podcast? You have to find the right person.
That's it, I suppose, as well. That was kind of very smoothly lead me on to my last question, I think, for today, which was, what podcast trends do you see coming down the pipeline? I know you're gunning for, a video game podcast, but do you see any specific trends that are perhaps coming up down the timeline? Or, I mean, as you said, like, things that you think wouldn't really be like a big audience tend to have huge audiences. So is it very much up to having the right person, having the right content, and that informs so much of what is coming on the pipeline? I mean, even for things I think are so out of this world, there's podcasts for specifically that you don't need to listen to. Like, there's that very famous one, is it Sleep With Me, I think, or Come Sleep With Me, where a guy just talks very monotonous, I think, for about 2 hours, and it sends straight off to sleep. I mean, you could never pitch that to a radio one, or you could never pitch that to any other platform. But for podcast networks, so is there trends that are coming down the pipeline, or is it, as you said, rule number one, audience?
I think it's just going to get more and more mainstream, like bigger and bigger names. It's really talent driven right now. Like Michelle Obama is probably and Kim Kardashian, like two huge big new podcasts. It's going really mainstream. So I think the kind of like serials, they're really hard to make. And there's not a lot of money in them. Serial made a lot of money, but that was kind of the exception that proves the rule. It took a team a huge dedicated team of professionals who are at the top of their game, who all have good salaries to make that. And so yeah, a lot of resources put into that, whereas people are looking for now lower production costs, but that deliver high production value and really reach a big audience. So that's your Joe Rogans.
Famously, wanting more, asking for less. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is
And then
unfortunate.
just younger audiences. I think we're going to see I'm really looking forward to the podcast industry is small and it's snobby. The people who make stuff professionally, so they don't like to acknowledge like Joe Rogan until
Really?
Spotify buys the show for hundreds of million, and then it's like, oh yeah, that's the thing. So I'm looking forward to more kind of surprises where, while no one's paying attention, some video gamer becomes the biggest
Mm.
podcaster in the world.
I suppose, yeah, even things like that. I know for a lot of the Irish podcast charts and things like that, there's different people that are just doing it off their own cuff, but in the charts, they were hitting in the top scores for, and then that verges on to a global audience. Like the Blind Boy podcast, he would be a huge hitter. But then there's even these guys, they're called the Two Johnnies. They'd be a big one in Ireland. There are these two guys from like Kerry, but they would just have random chats. And I suppose that's almost, specific to Ireland itself. And again, different areas have such different specifications. So yeah, it's interesting that you said that like some ones might, be, in the background building up such an audience, and until it signs off that big deal, and until it legitimizes itself by being, bought over, like you said, Joe Rogan being that official bought by Spotify, then when will it be taken seriously? But I suppose, yeah, that's one of the ways to look about it. It's kind of know your audience, know what you're going into. Probably if we're to take anything away from our chat today, I think you've nailed on the head. It seems to be that constant audience and content. Those are your two biggest hitters. Even production value and stuff like that, people can manage their way around it, even though there may be a bit of snobbiness here and there. But if you look at figures and if something's performing well, then I mean, who's to say that it's not legitimate and it's not working? But I think just we're running out of time here. And I think I've probably grilled you enough for one day. So I'd just like to say a huge thank you, Lily, for coming on and yeah, having a chat for myself and for RTS Futures. We do really appreciate this and you taking the time out to really inform us about something that even for ourselves in the industry, people aren't able to have the conversations or people aren't able to engage with. So really appreciate it.
Oh,
And
my pleasure.
if there's anything else, I don't know if people would, I don't know if they have further questions, they might get in touch. Could they email even Chalk and Blade to inquire about certain situations?
Yeah,
Or, yeah.
absolutely. So you can get in touch, info@chalkandblade.com. Get in touch. Tell me what you listen to, what you think young people need to hear, what what podcasts are going to be popular with young people.
Or even, I suppose, would you be able to offer any advice? I know it is such a strenuous workforce, but I know from sometimes in radio, they would say, send us a demo. Would you accept any kind of a link to say, I have a podcast to start, if there's any pointers that you could take away from it? Because I think that's one thing that I would be, even myself, from starting my own one quite recently, I'd be really interested to see from professional points of view where you can access that from, other than, sending it into Reddit and saying, guys, give me your honest opinion.
I will say, if I say yes, that'll open it up to like
Yeah.
a little
So
much. But
maybe other production companies, yeah, they
The
might
thing
take
is,
them.
it's important to stress what we do as a production company, and we don't look necessarily for existing podcasts to take to the next level. We usually develop our own ideas. So you want to get in touch with someone who works at a platform like Acast, who takes on creators. Like, I'm not necessarily that person. I'm the person who will give you advice on how to work at a production company. But to be honest, I wouldn't really know what I'm listening for on like I would just be like, oh, I like, either it doesn't sound like you recorded it properly, or yeah, it was fun, or I'm bored now. Like, I almost think if you want advice on on your own podcast, get your friends to listen to it and say, when did you lose interest? When were you confused? When, get them to write down time codes, like, I trailed off here, da da da. Yeah, I love giving people advice on how to break into the industry, content trends, that kind of thing. But I'm definitely not your listen to my podcast and tell me what you think person.
No, that's great to clarify, just in case you start hounded with links and different things like
Yeah.
that. But no, that's perfect. Thank you so much again for everybody that has joined us on today's online webinar. I think, is that the easiest way to call these things? Honestly, I don't know. But yeah, and if anybody would like to see further the events that we're running, you can follow us on Facebook, on Twitter, and even online as well. It's RTS Futures NI. And again, RTS are running
Oh,
various
someone has another
workshops.
question.
Oh, yeah, if we have time for it, I can chuck it in. Okay, yeah, would you like to check another question?
Yeah,
Was
I'll
this up
answer
through in
that.
time? I was just I'm conscious of me hounding with you a lot of questions. Yeah, no worries. Sorry about that, Alison. Just seeing that there now. So Julia Roberts, in the scripted adaptation, Homecoming was an interesting transferal from podcast to scripted series. Do you see this type of transferal? I don't even know.
Versioning?
Burgeoning also?
I do. That is a really exciting trend on a really big level. So that's creating your own show, your own intellectual property, and then having it bought by a TV show is the dream. It's like it it's definitely something as a production company that we try to do. It's and more and more TV shows and movies are looking to podcasts to option them, which is, when they buy it, they buy the IP and they own it then. So, and which is what, for so long, all these book adaptations, it's huge. So yeah, that's a huge content trend on like a really, really big level. It's a kind of on the same level as like Spotify buying up all these shows to be exclusives. That's where like the big money is, definitely.
Well, there we have it. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think we've, yeah, glad I got that one because that was very interesting actually. Thank you so much again for every that's sent in your questions and got in touch. Again, Lily, thank you so much.